Hi, my name is Todd Leonard.
And my name is Herb Montgomery, and we're just talking.
Thank you for taking a moment to click our like button. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our show. And if you would like to get notifications about upcoming episodes, click that bell icon.
So, if you're new to our channel, each week, Todd and I take a moment to talk about the upcoming weekend's lectionary reading from the Gospels. And our goal is to talk about those passages in the context of love, inclusion, social justice. Our hope is that our talking will be just talking, as in justice, but that also something we might say during this time as we go back and forth would inspire you alongside with us to do more than just talking. So, Todd, what passage are we looking at this week?
We have been granted justice by finally being set free from the Gospel of John, and we have entered the land of milk and honey, the land of plenty of Mark, chapter 7, 1 through 8, 14 through 15, and 21 through 23.
Yeah, so there's a lot here for those who are unfamiliar with the passage. Um it's the issue with the hand washing. Jesus turns it around from being about, well, the hand washing and the ignoring of taking care of our responsibility to our elder loved ones, our parents. Um, Jesus turns it around to a conversation about what's inside a person rather than outside. And then there's a list here of things that come out of a person's heart. There's a lot to talk about here this tonight. I hope we get to that list before we're done.
The good news is we are not constrained by uh, the uh, the capitalist commercial enterprise, but we are constrained by the limits of graciousness of our broad viewer base. So we will
Everybody
try to.
everybody has an attention span.
So we do need to honor and respect that. So yeah. So where do you want to start, Herb?
Well, let's start right at the first part of that with the ceremonial washing and how the disciples were eating food with hands that were unwashed. And this is before germ theory.
Right. It's before soap.
Yeah,
I mean, there
before soap.
was really. I mean,
Maybe
yeah.
I don't know the history of soap. Was it before soap?
I get well. I just yeah. I guess I'm just making that up. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if they had some form of soap back then. I want to doubt it, but I could be wrong. Maybe somebody could leave in the comments if there was soap back then.
That would be a good question. But let's not allow ourselves to get off track on that. That I think that was my fault. So I mean, but what they're doing in this context, the ceremonial washing, is literally just wetting the hands in water, dipping the hands in a basin of water. There is no if soap existed, they were not using soap.
Right, right. And I'm sure it was possible that maybe originally where this came from, not during this time, but from where this ceremonial ritual originated, maybe there was some observation that people who wash their hands didn't get sick as often. I don't know. I don't know where that came from because there was no germ theory. I
Right.
was told to wash my hands because of germs when I was growing up.
Right. Which had some science to support.
Right. This is before any of that was known. So you're
I just
washing
wonder
your
if this
hands
is
to be
any
holy.
the whole shift. I mean, there was still the temple at this time, and
Correct.
so there was obviously the large laver basin of water in the temple. I wonder if this ceremonial washing that the Pharisees were introducing was part of this uh, a a mini observance of what took place in the temple. I don't know if there's any
Could have been.
evidence of that that there was a ritualistic following of if I don't know, just
Maybe a
throwing that
nod
out.
to that. possibly.
Yeah. I mean,
I
since I
know that.
figure, since
Go
I'm
ahead.
making stuff up, Herb, I'm just going to keep just throwing up stuff that I don't actually know.
Okay.
That's my role. You research stuff and you bring stuff that you actually have scholars backing up. I'm just throwing up
Well,
stuff, whatever comes to my head.
your
So
input
anyway.
is valuable. Your contribution is valuable, Todd. What I do know is that the Pharisees were kind of outsiders in the political power structure of the
Mm-hmm.
day. You had the Sadducees, which were the majority shareholders among the Sanhedrin, and then you had the high priestly class that benefited from the temple state. Those were the two highest political powers, the priesthood and the high priesthood and the Sadducees. The
Mm-hmm.
Pharisees were kind of like a blue collar working person's religious
Mm-hmm.
in structure. They were competing with those other two for political power within. Think of them as political parties. They were competing with those other two power players, those other two parties,
Mm-hmm.
Sadducees
Mm-hmm.
and the high priesthood. They were competing with them, but those were kind of the political powerhouses of they were the influencers, or rather the religious representatives of the wealthy and the elites, right? And
Mm-hmm.
their definition of righteousness was actually even more conservative than um than the Pharisees, because the Sadducees and the high priest, they define righteousness in such a way that really the only people that could ever be pure and holy were those that could afford
Yes.
to live in such a way that enabled you to maintain that purity or that
Mm-hmm.
holiness, right? And so
It
what that did was
required
that
it
created
required
inside and
yeah.
it created insiders and outsiders based on economic status.
Right.
The Pharisees were more a populist party where they loosened the constraints
Mm.
of righteousness so that even a poor person could be holy and pure. It wasn't
Yeah.
as strict for them, right? So they were
Right.
actually on a theological basis, they were actually more liberal
Yeah.
than the conservative Sadducees, because the Sadducees again were very strict, and their definition of morality or righteousness or holiness, it required you to have some means in order to live up to that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I've written about that in the past, but if anybody message me if anybody wants a reference for that. But again, so the Pharisees here, they're picking on Jesus for washing with unwashed hands. I'm sure it was, if this was a populist party, it must have been a practice that was accessible to most people in that culture.
Right.
Right. So but Jesus seems to disregard it. And again, it's not about germ theory. It's about defining who was in and who was out. And what I love is that Jesus brings up what, he calls them hypocrites.
Mm.
And well, before we get to that, this is probably a good place to bring this up, Todd, if I could go off topic for just a minute.
Okay.
So in the Gospel of John,
Oh,
it's
okay.
it's the Jews that are the bad
Oh,
guys,
right.
right? Just in
Right.
general, John is the most anti-Semitic of all the four Gospels.
Mm-hmm.
It's just always the Jews, the Jews. There's no specific. There's no, they're monolithic. They're all, it's just the Jews. When we get to Mark,
Mm-hmm.
though, in Mark's Gospel, before any of that had developed, the trope is against the Pharisees. The Pharisees are the bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not as bad, but using the term Pharisee as a pejorative or as a slight, a slander, is a very, it has a long history. It's an anti-Semitic trope. And we have to remember too, in defense of the Pharisees were not monolithic. There were more conservative Pharisees and more liberal Pharisees. The more liberal Pharisees are the ones that won out in the end. They were the ones that defined the Torah as love, that everything in the Torah could be practiced through love, that was the definition of the Torah.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that was the roots, that was the soil out of which rabbinic Judaism grew. The more conservative Pharisees were the school of Shammai, and they didn't win in the power struggle between the Hillelian Pharisees and the Shammai Pharisees. And so what I'm saying is, if we only read Mark and we don't know any of the outside history around it, then we just think of the Pharisees as the bad guys. When
Right.
really the Pharisees ended up being the good guys, and they had more in common with the Jesus movement than other groups did, because what Hillel taught and what Jesus taught was very similar.
Mm.
And that's what rabbinic Judaism came out of. So the people that slander the Jews and say, well, the Jews this and the Jews that and the Pharisees, I don't want to be a Pharisee and all that stuff, it's uninformed from the historical basis, and it's
Mm.
just informed basically off these stories, who were just picking on a certain sect within the Pharisees that probably did what we're reading about this week. But the whole point is, never trust what a Christian tells you about a Jew. They're
I
way
was
better than the Christians are going to paint them to be.
I was hoping you'd say that.
No, the Gospels, you got to have some history in there with the Gospels, because the Gospels are picking on probably the worst parts of these communities, and it's low
Yeah.
hanging fruit.
See, this is, and I think we need to point this out, is if you were, if so, I'm going to bring up an example of a historian I respect, recognizing that, again, even any historian today is not completely objective, but taking a historian who at least operates or attempts to operate by a certain kind of ethics that is accepted as the norm in today's culture, I would suggest somebody like John Meacham.
Okay.
And I think if he was to describe this passage, he would have no problem bringing up the fact that Jesus was having a debate. If this is understood as, if you go back and do the deep research, the historical research, find this was an actual factual discussion that took place, he would have no problem discussing that there was a political disagreement between Jesus and the Pharisees about whether this washing of hands was a necessary part of spiritual tradition within the Jewish community.
Correct.
But then be able to, at some point in discussing this and other disagreements that Jesus and the Pharisees had, at some point be able to say, as we know later on Jewish history, we actually see the results of, we actually see so much between Jesus and especially the Hillelian Pharisees lining up. Uh, this would all be in one historical account rather than what you've had to do, which is to frankly not trust that the Gospel of Mark or even all four Gospels together get the entire story correct, and you have to go and look at other extra biblical sources and there are modern scholars who have dug in more and done more research to try to get the full picture. We have to understand the scriptures, again, as we've said a number of times in the past, had agendas
Mm-hmm.
and reflect very human understandings of things and frankly bigotry, bias, uh, and willing to throw certain segments of people under the bus at times for their own uh, political or religious purposes.
Yeah. In defense of Mark, I am appreciative that at least we're having a debate now back within the Jewish
It's a
community.
it's an intra-Jewish debate rather than
Yes. Yes.
a Christian versus Jew debate.
Which in the Gospel of John, it's always the Christians versus the Jews. It's the Jesus
Right,
followers versus the Jews. We almost forget that Jesus was a Jew and all the
right,
disciples were Jews, right?
right,
But when we get to the Gospel of Mark, this is Jewish people, this Jewish group set of voices arguing with this set of Jewish voices. And if we understand it that way, we can still honor the story and not promote anti-Semitism.
right, right. Yeah. So it's Yeah, I think, I'll be honest with you, Herb. At times I've said, all right, Herb, we get it. I mean, you say it a lot, you bring it up a lot, but here's the thing. Again, with our huge audience, you're really turning the tide of Christian culture on this. But
It's still
because
worth saying.
it's still worth saying, and because our Christian culture overwhelmingly has been either intentional in its anti-Semitism or reckless in not addressing this issue and just throwing the terms around and not saying, hey, we need to be careful with this. This anti-Jewish rhetoric has really seeped into Christians' understanding of itself. And I mean, it's amazing how often I have heard over the course of my ministry as a pastor, the little anti-Jewish, and it's not little, but the comments, the anti-Jewish comments that come up in conversations with my fellow Christians that they have put together in their heads or heard other Christians say against Jewish people because
Or Jewish
that's
wisdom.
that's what us Christians believe, right?
Right, right, right. Hey, I'm part online of multiple like these online communities where like we'll chat like this during the week various times. Some one of them I only meet with monthly. But these are progressive communities, people that are inclusive and that are affirming and that have, they're progressive in other areas of their life, not just progressive religiously, but and they're justice minded, and and I still, even among those communities, will hear beautiful people say, beautifully kind, just people, justice minded people still slip into that Christian rhetoric,
Mm-hmm.
that Christian anti-Jewishness, and will say, well, the Jews this or the Jews that. And
Yeah,
I cringe every time I hear that because it's always negative. Well, the Jews had it
right.
wrong. And I guess, Christians just, built on that. No, the Jews
No,
didn't have everything wrong.
no, they didn't, and they had so much right that we don't we don't give them enough credit for because the Gospels and Paul's writings had so much negative to say against
Right.
certain
Sure.
Jewish people that the writers, for whatever reason, grouped in and painted in very broad brush racial and broad categories when they should have been very specific in saying this is certain people in certain communities that maybe perhaps were ethnically or religiously Jewish. They did have debates, but let's be very clear, this was a specific debate within a certain community over a specific issue, and let's not turn this into a whole thing against a whole race of people. And because nobody was responsible about that in these writings, this is where we've come to.
Well, at the time these writings were being made, there was such anti-Semitism within
Well, that's
Rome
right.
that
Right.
they wanted to distance themselves
Right.
from the Jewish people. So how do we do that? Well, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So if we hate
Right.
the Jewish people too, we must be
Right.
okay. You know what I mean? So how
Yep.
much of that was playing into the
Right. Oh, for sure. Huge.
so all of that is to say, when we're picking on the Pharisees this week, when the text is in our reading, I just want everybody to be clear. Not all the Pharisees were like this. This was only one sect of the Pharisees. And
Yeah.
by no means is this to mean that all the Pharisees were bad. And it is definitely by no means to promote in any form anything that is anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic. Everything Jesus taught, he learned within the context of an environment that Judaism provided for him.
Right.
And so we need to be just as generous
And
as we
then,
can be.
in one sense, too, you could also look at it this way. Oftentimes, the people that you end up having the most vigorous debates with are the ones you actually are the closest in agreement with. So you actually sometimes will have those where you you actually are disagreeing about smaller things because you agree on so much, that, and it's, you could even possibly choose to look at it this way. Um,
Absolutely. So the Pharisees that are being picked on this week were very fastidious, scrupulous about washing hands before you ate,
hmm,
but, and this is where Jesus calls them hypocrites. Now, full circle back to that. It was that term hypocrite that launched me on that rant. Sorry, but he calls this group hypocrites because of the loophole that they had created in their tradition, where you could declare a certain part of your wealth in a certain category and then give it to the temple rather
hmm,
than using it to take care of your aging parents. Your aging
hmm.
parents were becoming destitute and bereft, and you, but you, because all the money that should have gone to support them, they were giving to the temple and the temple state instead, which ultimately was just lining the pockets of the priesthood.
Right. Just quick clarification, Herb, where you're pulling this information about how they did that switcheroo so that they could get the money from the widows. Is that coming from the verses that the lectionary skips
It
over?
skips over. It's right here in this chapter. It's still
Okay,
Mark
that's what I
7.
just
In
wanted to clarify
reality,
that for folks who may have been looking at a
yes.
lectionary passage and weren't seeing it because they weren't looking through every verse of Mark 7.
Yeah, so this verse is Mark 1 through 8, right? And
Yes,
what I'm talking about, I think, is in between
and
those
9
two
through 13.
passages. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
It
That's
may
I just
be
wanted to clear that for
16 through
folks.
20, but I think it's 9 through 13.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify that.
No, that's great. That's great. I appreciate it. I'm glad you did. So basically, fine. So you want to pick on the disciples for not washing their hands. How about taking care of our aged and our elderly?
Yeah.
Which I love
And
that about
this
Jesus.
Yeah, and I think this is a thought that came to me a little bit earlier,
It's
Herb, and
9 through
that's
13. Sorry. It's Mark 9, Mark 7, 9 through 13. It's the 9 through 13 section, and it's Corban. If you declared
Corbin,
something
right?
Corban,
Right.
then your father or mother didn't get it. It went to the temple.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So that um, this makes me go back to the hand washing situation and then the Corbin thing, because we know Jesus really did go after, and especially we see this when he cleanses the temple, and we see this as he's coming through at the triumphal entry near the close of his ministry before he's crucified, where he weeps over Jerusalem and says, "You who kill the prophets," and things like that, and emphasizes the corruption of Jerusalem, which is a direct criticism against the temple rulers, the
Temple
temple
state and the
class, the
economic
Sadducees, the
exploitation. Yeah.
economic exploitation. This, to me, what this, it seems to me what Jesus is pointing to here is it seems like that perhaps the Shammai Pharisees that he's addressing here might be too much still tied into the temple system, still too much tied into the traditions
Well, they are
of,
competing for power within that structure.
yeah, and so that perhaps, and so whether they are, yeah, adopting those practices in order to get more power, or whether they are sticking to those traditions for the sake of, for whatever reason. And I just wonder if that's that same thing with the ceremonial washing is a holdover, that is again something, a holdover from the temple class. Again, not it's a minutia compared to the stealing from
Right.
the widows.
Right.
But
And this
that's
principle, go ahead.
go
Go ahead.
ahead.
No,
No,
go
no, no.
ahead.
That just makes me wonder. It seems like he may be trying to point out to them, if you guys think you guys are so much better than the priestly class and the temple, the class, you've still got some corruption you've got to deal with within your house, as much
Mm.
as you guys are the blue collar. You are more inclusive of other people. As much as I agree with you on this and that, in these things, you've got work to do.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Totally. Um I, I mean this principle, this point is made in other passages in Matthew and Luke. And you remember, he says you tithe on mint and
Yes.
cumin and all of your spice rack in your kitchen, right?
Right. Right.
But you're neglecting the weightier matters of the law: justice, mercy, the love of God.
Mm-hmm.
Here he would say in Mark, the weightier matters of the law: taking care of your aged parents.
Yeah.
This is before social safety nets.
Mm-hmm.
You should be taking care of your parents, and instead, um
Yeah.
which I love, that we should be creating a society where the elderly are taken care of.
Right.
And that's a Jesus principle. That's a Jesus value.
Yeah.
Social
Yeah.
security is a good thing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I think all of us, well, I shouldn't say all of us, but most of us that were raised in religious environments have witnessed at times our religious community making a big deal out of things that are really intrinsically harmless, while they fail to make any deal out of some things that are actually intrinsically harmful. Like sometimes we've witnessed a blind eye being, turned from, that's a horrible phrase. Anyway, I'm sorry.
It's
If
just like,
anybody,
let me just bring
does
this
have a
up.
blind eye, let me just also say, a point at which you don't understand. I shouldn't have. That's an ableist term, and I own it, and I shouldn't have used it. Go ahead.
This is just great to see that this is how deeply this stuff is ingrained.
It's the water we swim in.
This stuff, and I realized the other day that I in a talk I gave a couple of years ago, I said something about being at the bottom of the totem pole. Didn't even think about it. Didn't even think about it, and realized, well, of course, that's going again. That's making light of Native American culture, and it's like this stuff is so deeply. It's just we continue to pay attention. You continue to learn. You continue to grow. So,
Yep. And our language continues to grow. And some of the language we use is deeply seated in habits that were formed before we knew as much as we know today.
that's right.
So anyway, that's not an excuse. That's a confession, and I'll do better.
Yeah.
But many times we see, what I meant to say was that many times we see things being ignored in our religious community that are seriously harmful, while things that are isn't hurting anybody. It's like these are the hills people will die on.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I just that's the flavor of what we're getting this week, is that Jesus is saying hand wash. Again, this is before germ theory, so he's saying hand washing. Really?
Yeah.
I mean, what about taking care of your mother and father?
Right. I had
What?
a. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No. Finish your thought.
No, I was just going to move us on to the list because I really
Okay.
want to know what the
All
list
right.
is. So say what you're going to say.
I have an illustration. I have no. Again, remember, I have no scholarship, so I have the illustration.
You
I
have
bring in.
tons.
I have illustration. So the illustration is I interviewed for a position as a prison chaplain today, and I was talking to the person who would be my supervisor about the job, and they haven't had a chaplain quite a while. So this person has been kind of covering the chaplain responsibilities and has had some volunteers helping them in providing some spiritual care, and they're having just a hard time with this one volunteer who refuses to let a certain group of ladies sing the songs they want to sing in prison because they are not completely theologically accurate. And so these women who are waiting in prison for months seeking asylum from either a war-torn or drug cartel-torn country, and who have nothing
Except for these songs.
except for these songs that speak to their hope and their faith in their God, uh, are not allowed to sing their songs because the theology is a little off.
Well, because that pastor disagrees with the theology.
Because the pastor disagrees. Well, yeah, no, yeah, exactly. Not that in the pastor's opinion, their theology is a little bit off.
Yeah.
And so he has strained out the gnat and swallowed the camel.
Yeah.
Because that is even a really minor example of some of the larger things that Christianity on a broad scale has done. But that's just the most recent example that I'm aware of today that I learned about.
Sure. Yeah. And I'm sure everybody that's watching that grew up in and I shouldn't say everybody again, but most of us who grew up in a religious environment, we've all got examples like that where we've witnessed our faith community making a big deal out of something that in reality wasn't that big a deal.
Yep.
While the big deals are kind of ignored.
Yep.
So, yeah. It's very easy to miss the boat. So I do want to talk about this.
That missed the boat phrase, Herb.
Tell me about
so anti late arriving nautical journey people.
Shut up, Todd.
I don't want to make light of this. It's just anyway, please continue.
This list at the end of our passage this week, I just got some questions on it. I would love to know, and there's no way to know this, but I would love to know, is this really Jesus's list? Or is this the Markan community's list for whom this gospel was written? You know, because, and the big red flag that jumps out at me immediately is the fact that adultery is part of this list.
Mm-hmm.
And we know, and again, I'm going to quote, this is from the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, Volume 4.
Not some liberal rag.
Right. Adultery did not refer to sex with a single woman. It only concerned itself with the property rights of a man to whom the woman belonged, either his wife or a woman who was betrothed to him. The concern is never, if you would have, if a married man had sexual intercourse with a woman who is not betrothed to or not married to another man, it just wouldn't have been called adultery. It wouldn't have been called adultery. It may have been a problem, but it wasn't adultery. Adultery was only concerned with the rights of the man to whom the woman belonged. So it's problematic for Jesus to include that term in a morality list, checklist.
Unless he is, for some reason, only addressing men, and he's trying, as he does in other places, say, men, the way that you have written the adultery rules are wrong. And he says you cannot divorce your wife.
Right. There are places in Mark where he's anti-divorce because in that patriarchal culture, a man could divorce his wife for anything and it left women destitute.
Right.
Right.
But
so I don't see the critique here, though, Todd.
No, it's not there. And even as I was saying it, I don't see that there. So you're right. This seems even though Mark is later than it seems a little bit Pauline in the it does.
And all morality is kind of like a group project, right? What we determine as morally right or wrong is always decided by the community or the culture to which we belong. And some of those morality rules or ethics rules they're universal. Like all cultures say this is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And some things are cultural specific. Only certain cultures say some things are morally wrong. Other cultures don't. All morality is culturally based, and then individuals have to decide whether they're going to embrace that definition of morality or
Mm.
not, right?
Right.
But it just seems to me this is the Markan community's definition of morality
Hmm.
based on that. Just,
Yeah,
yeah.
could be.
So, anyway, that's my thought. Today, I think we would all kind of agree on what murder is, right? What greed is,
Mm-hmm.
what theft is. Talking about morality being culturally um, defined. We are right now in the midst in the United States of a culture war over defining certain areas of morality. And I'm looking at two words here in this list. I think everything else we could agree on, except for two parts of this list. One is the sexual immorality, and the other is lewdness. Well, what really is
Mm.
lewd and what isn't? What is
Right.
sexually immoral and what isn't?
Yep.
And that's where our culture struggles today to find any real consensus. There just seems to be a stark divide between those that define sexual morality over here or those that define sexual morality over here instead. Um,
Mm-hmm. But doesn't
and the
can
Bible
we
doesn't
not?
help us, Todd.
You read my mind,
Sorry. I didn't mean to steal your thunder.
man.
If you're looking for sexual ethic in the Bible, man, is it hard to find anything definitive. The deeper you look for it, the more questions you have. Like the adultery conversation.
Yes.
So in my blog this week, I said, well, instead of starting with the biblical debate over all the different definitions of different definitions of sexual morality in the Bible, what if we just started with the golden rule? Made that our sexual ethic of what we defined was sexually moral or sexually
Right.
immoral, and we
Right.
have a conversation about consent. The patriarchy doesn't want to have that conversation.
The patriarchy is very concerned about certain people consenting
Right.
and other people not. And we can, I don't have to share who is who.
I mean, I just had some dear people that I just thought were awesome. Like there was this topic, and I don't want to go into the details. There's this topic that I didn't know a lot about, and they knew a ton about it. And I was learning so much from them for free. And I just thought, this is so awesome. I am learning so much from these people. And then I discovered that they moved here within the last decade or so because they were leaving some state out west because the state was LGBT affirming and allowed there to be pride parades. And I was like, for crying out loud, because it just bothered me so much that anyway, for me, again, that's another definition of what's lewd and what isn't. For some people, pride
yeah.
parades are lewdness. I think pride parades are the kingdom showing up
Yeah.
or
Well, and again,
kingdom.
can we have any nuance with this? Can I say, you know what, honestly, if I'm at a pride parade, I'm not anxious to see the guys dancing in the assless chaps. Can I say that? Can I
Sure.
say that's not for me that would be for me a little bit lewd. But can I also say that there are other parts of that gay pride parade that for me are some of the most profound and, as you say, uh, kingdom revealing moments that I would ever see anywhere would be at a pride parade.
Mm-hmm.
And so can we say, you know what? This movement of having space for people to express themselves and coming to terms with who they are as people uh, manifests in different ways. And so we may not always be comfortable with every expression of it, but in the big scheme of things, what we're seeing is people becoming healthier, holier, and
And
better.
again, you're talking to someone whose purity culture damage runs deep. I don't even
Yeah,
like. I am even uncomfortable by the word naked. Okay.
right,
I hate even the word. It makes me so uncomfortable. All right. So I want to
right.
preface what I'm about to say by saying that first as to who it is that's saying it. But let's be honest, isn't that definition of lewdness even culturally
Of
defined?
course,
I
of
mean, if we go
course,
into another culture, and I'm thinking of a few in certain parts of the globe
of course.
where less clothing is
Nudity
worn,
is not an issue.
it's not an issue. It's not
It's
defined as
not.
lewd.
It's not. So
And so we're talking about
it's
a universal list here of something that's right and
correct,
wrong for everybody. How do we define
correct,
that?
right. And so I think, and so again, so to have, be able to have, to be able to say, again, to be able to look at things and say, all right, what is, what is the most important thing happening here?
Mhm.
And then what are other important things that are happening here? And then let me make sure that I'm keeping first things first. And then I can wrestle with some of the other things, and maybe I can wrestle with whether or not we should be doing the ceremonial washing of hands. But for damn sure, we're not going to take advantage of widows anymore. And for damn sure, we're not going to shame people for being proud of who God made them to be.
Sure, sure, sure.
We're not going to stop them from being proud and try to shame them back into a closet. We're not going to do that,
Right.
even if in some of the ways that they choose to reveal themselves makes me uncomfortable. I realize that in that it is more important for me to be a little bit uncomfortable when they've probably been at points ready to end their own life,
And right now they're feeling like a child of God. And for
possibly
whatever
rejected by their
reason,
parents.
right.
And now they're finally feeling like I am who I am, I'm proud of who I am, and I'm going to live my life as this integrated person.
And all to have the wisdom to recognize that when that healing has taken place and affirm it
Yes.
rather than move
And so
away from it.
I have people in my church that I know that some of their non-church activities were probably activities that I would be uncomfortable at.
Sure.
But doggone it, they were children of God who also belonged in the pews and on the stage in my congregation, because more important than what they chose to imbibe or how they dressed was that they understood they were children of God.
Hmm.
And I was not going to do anything ever to jeopardize in any way possible that they would ever question again whether or not they were children of God. Because that's the first thing.
Yeah. And
That's not going to be sacrificed.
I wish with 2,000 years of perspective to look back on this passage, I would have loved it if the Jesus of Mark 7 had pulled what he pulled in other chapters, where he said, it's from within, out of a person's thought, the heart, that evil thoughts come. That the thoughts that should be within a person's heart are loving the Lord your God with everything you
Yes,
have
yes,
and loving your neighbor as yourself,
yes,
treating others the way you would like to be treated. And
yes.
then we can build whatever list we want to build
Correct.
off
Off
of
of those.
those.
Everything can hang off of those, but we got to damn well start there.
Because in following the golden rule, well, adultery in this list, we've already pointed out, breaks that golden rule for women, doesn't really care about women.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And so who's to say that however they're defining the rest of this list defines it in those constraints. So anyway, I think where I land on this is I love the fact that Jesus turns inward, INWARD on this.
We bring this up. We bring this up because when Herb and I were preparing for tonight, I thought he was saying Jesus was talking about the N word, which
And I was
just
saying
reflects,
inward, like inside, inward.
yes, inward, inside. I
Like I
Herb
don't think
triggered
Jesus talked about that.
my racist tendencies.
I don't
So
think Jesus
I
talked about the inward.
no, he didn't. So it's just interesting how tonight's topic just brought up so many ways of us revealing our own bigotries and insulting other people. Herb, this is telling. Perhaps God is trying to speak to you and me about things we need to work on in our lives. Maybe
I
we should
own it and I'm
pause
working
here
on it.
and have a prayer.
Thank you, Chaplain Todd. Chaplain Todd's
Sorry.
trying to save my soul.
Just as I am. Please, I'm sorry, Herb.
Uh,
Please continue. I think you are trying to bring us to a conclusion.
no, I love the fact that Jesus turns towards what comes out of a person that defiles them rather than what goes in, because what's on the outside. I love that. How many times have we all been judged based on what's on the outside?
Yes.
And so I think, looking at what comes out of a person from inside of them is a healthier, more holistic way to look at things. And I think of, like, I'm doing a lot of work with high school kids these days. And even the high school kids that outwardly act up, you have to ask yourself, what's going on the inside there?
Always.
What's happening here?
Always. That's always the question you ask.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah. Yeah. What's going on the inside? So I appreciate this, the wisdom that's in this passage this week. I just wish we would have defined what's going on the inside more universally.
Yes.
That's all.
Yes.
That's all. More inclusively.
Man, dude, we could take a whole other episode and just talk about every time something exhibits itself outwardly in us, it's always an invitation to find out what's going on inside of us, especially when we're angry, especially when we're angry, especially when we do something to harm somebody else. That is exactly the moment to say, whoa, 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 whoa. What the hell is wrong with me that I would do something like that? It's not that they cut me off. It's not that they cussed me out. Not it's how I reacted says does not say a thing about them. It says everything about me. Man, that's a whole other
I was so
huge
proud of
conversation.
I was so proud of my son this week. This is his first week of school. He's a junior in high school, and he's taking a high school psychology course. And in the psychology course, the instructor asked the class, why do some people act so arrogant? Why do they act so cocky? And why is that? Why do some people act cocky? And nobody, it's the first week of class, so nobody's really going to raise their hand and say anything. But my son raises his hand, and his answer was exactly what we're talking about. He said most people are cocky because really inside they're insecure.
Exactly.
And so that's just another testimony that whatever we see on the outside, there's something much deeper going on the inside. And that's where our focus should be. That's where the focus should be. And I love that about our passage this week. I love that Jesus said, outward, schmoutward. We're going to focus on the inside.
Hold on. Wait, okay.
Outward,
was that in 9
schmoutward.
through 13 or was that in 16 to 20?
Go to the last verse in this chapter. It's in the one right after that.
Outward, schmoutward.
Outward, schmoutward. We're going to focus on the inward. The INWARD. Inward.
Oh man, that's so good. Man. See, we can't do this to our viewers, so we're going to wrap up. But man, that's just like, I want to go on for another 20 minutes, but we're not. We're stopping. So, so it's my turn. So I want to tell you guys, please make sure to check out renewedheartministries.com. There you'll be able to find all of Herb's materials, including his weekly blogs, his podcast. You'll be able to sign up for his monthly newsletter and his mailings, and you'll also be able to find links to his published works, including his most recent book, Finding Jesus, and most importantly, if when you realize how sad it is that he spends time sharing all his wisdom with a doofus like me, that you want to support his ministry, there's a donate button there, and I'd encourage you to donate to support Renewed Art Ministries. And thank you to all of you who are already doing that, because as you know, the scholarship that you get, and not only the scholarship, but then the practical application into our world today, it's profound what Herb brings. And I don't think we've brought this up here, and I bring this sometimes when I'm talking about Herb to my friends. This man, who is a scholar, does not have the degree initials to go behind his name. This is a man who's done this all on his own, and does not have the typical scholarly pedigree, but he has done the work and done the scholarship on his own, and has become a scholar in his own right without the hooty snooty typical academia
That
route.
doesn't mean we're anti-intellectual or anti-academia.
No, he's done all the work of reading all the hooty snooty people. But this man is West Virginia, true blue all the way through, man. This guy is homegrown, blue collar, Pharisee of Pharisees. This guy is the best.
Thanks, Todd.
So anyway,
I had no idea Todd was going to do this tonight, everybody. But thank you.
I had
Todd.
no idea
that was very
either.
generous.
This is so well because I don't contribute to your ministry, so I had to say some nice things.
Say something.
So.
Thanks so much. Todd.
I'm poor right now. In a couple of years, I should have a career that pays enough that I can start supporting you again. So it will happen.
Todd, I just want to say, and to everyone out there, don't let Todd shortchange you on what he brings to the table either. There's a lot of wisdom. There's a lot of wisdom in that bald head. See, it makes you uncomfortable, doesn't it? You just put me through discomfort. Now I'm going to turn.
I know you did. You did. You made me uncomfortable. You're right. So way to go.
All right, everyone. Thanks for watching us tonight. We appreciate you putting up with us. Hopefully, something we said tonight encouraged you to keep making the world a safer, more compassionate, more just home for everybody. Thanks for watching.
Appreciate y'all. We'll see you next week.